So I want to talk to you about design because that's my personal passion. And I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from having seen and lived through enough horrible PowerPoint presentations that I now believe that I might actually sign myself up to a personal crusade of making sure PowerPoints never look ugly again. And I have this passion for smart people like you, scientists, engineers, creative thinkers who spend a lot of time crafting and building their ideas that don't spend enough time trying to make sure that you're visually communicating your idea as well. And so this section is a little bit longer than the rest, but we'll kind of move through it super quick. It has a lot of examples to what some of you have been asking for as well. So I'm hoping that this is what this is more of the meat that you get as well. So I'll start with basically when you're thinking about designing a deck specifically. This is more of like an ideology that I tend to call Slideology. Again, going after Nancy Duarte and the work that their firm has done. There's a book on this if anybody wants to pull that up as well. There are basically 5 parts to thinking about design for decks specifically. First one is like, what is the content? Again, just like we talked about what do you think about when designing a pitch? What is the content? How do you clarify and keep that messaging from that content really, really high? How do you build and use contrast so that you're amplifying the message that you're building? And then using different tactics to compel. So this is that movement of that hero, your audience through that journey, that story arc that you're creating. And then the last is you have to create a consistency of expectations. So you already noticed through this talk, I've tended to use 2 colors. You kind of expect the same font face from me. What are some of those other ways in which you can create consistency and expectations for the audience so that when you break that consistency, they know it's something to pay attention to? So we'll talk a little bit about those few different aspects. And again, please keep your questions coming. We'll pause in a little bit to ask and check in with you as well. So I'm going to start with content. And there were great questions about like how many stickies is too many, a lot? Like how do we get everything that we have in our head out? And the place that I typically tend to start is ideas, especially something that you're building into a pitch, tend to be spread out over different forms. Like you might have, existing content like papers that you've written, emails that you've written, slides you might have already created or someone else has shared with you. Can you pull all of that existing content? And then can you build on that existing content by searching the web for other resources that support the story and structure that you're trying to say? So for example, with this presentation that I'm giving to you right now, I know I don't have enough time to share all of the stuff that I would like. So giving that plug to the TED Talk, for example, is me pulling on resources that might be useful for you, but I don't necessarily have time to go into details on. So can you build on that existing content by bringing in supporting material from people, experts, from sources that are really credible to bolster your story even more? And then all of your stickies that you've created, like all the stuff that's in your head, can you start pulling that stuff, all the new content that you think needs to go into your presentation as well together? So 3 sources that you're building on: existing, what is new and supportive, and what is brand new that's in your head that you think is missing and can really help tell the story. So once you have those pieces, then you start ordering the ideas. It's like now you start thinking about what does that story arc look like? How do you, which order do they come from? Like, do you start with the big idea? Sometimes it's appropriate to start with a big idea. We talk to a lot of corporates and corporate executives as part of what we do at Engage. And I know with them, you always lead with the punchline. So you give them the executive summary up front, because if they decide whether they want to listen to you or not in the first 4 or 5 minutes, and then you either get them for the rest of the meeting or you don't. So sometimes it really does help to put that big idea up front, give that executive summary. Sometimes when your pitch is 4 or 5 minutes long, you might not want to lead with that big idea up front, and you want to build that tension, you want to build that story so that you're building up to that climax at the end where you're revealing a product, a launch, right? So there are different, again, contexts in which it's appropriate to do one or the other. So how do you order your ideas for the audience, for the context in which you're talking to them in? So once you have that set up, now you have your content, you have the structure. The next thing is, how do you boost the clarity of the message that you have? So with this, I'll specifically, again, I'm an electrical engineer, so I hope you'll forgive me using some jargon. We talk about signal and noise a lot, right? So where's the signal and what is the noise? So for example, for whatever reason, the noise is not rendering properly, but next to signal, it says noise. So for example, in the signal noise case, you want the signal to be high enough that it drowns out the noise. So in every slide that you design, in every idea that you're putting out there, the content that you're pulling together, can you identify for yourself what is the signal and what is the noise? Because you don't want that to be the result. You want it to be as high signal as possible. If you think about changing the world, this momentous picture that's taken of Dr. King giving the I Have a Dream speech, that's exactly what you want people to associate with when you want them to think about changing the world. So this is very high signal. So can you go through your ideas and start to sift out what part of your idea might be signal, what part of your idea might be noise, and how do you amplify the signal while damping down the noise? That's what you want to do. That's the first part about clarification. The next one that I personally really like is one message per slide. If you've noticed the cadence at which we are going through PowerPoint right now, I think we might have done like 40 or 45 slides so far. I don't pay any attention to all of the formulas out there that say you need 1 minute per slide, you need one slide per 5 minutes. None of that stuff matters. It matters what the slide is saying, and is it signal or is it noise, and what is it communicating? So for me, I like to be able to talk to what I'm presenting. And so I specifically recommend having just one thing for people to focus on, no distractions, so that you control where the audience is directing their attention to. So one message per slide. And for those who wanted examples, here's one. So this is kind of like an exaggerated example again, but I like this one because we see a lot of slides that look like this that might not be quite as bad, but they come from entrepreneurs nonetheless. So if you ask people what sets our company apart, and they've given me all these bullet points, so let's just apply some of the lessons that we learned. We do want people to understand what sets the company apart, but so much text is really distracting. This falls kind of in that teleprompter space where people have taken that bullet everything out to the extreme. And so if we apply what we learned about one message per slide, what you could do is just notice that there are 3 items in this slide that really need to be communicated. Can we break them out so that each of them is just one slide by itself? So what sets our company apart? There are 3 things that set our company apart: global reach, superior technology, and our team. That's just it. So the previous slide becomes this slide, and then you have supporting material to talk about each of them. So now I will tell you what global reach means, what superior technology means, what team means. They don't need to see all the goods up front. And so you can now have the follow-up slides that tell people what each of the pieces are. And then we can walk through some of these examples to see what the designed aspects would look like. So let's look at using relationships. So for example, Duarte, again, I have the link in the bottom. They have this diagrammer tool that is available to everybody that gives you kind of like pre-polished designs that their people use. And you can use these relationships to kind of communicate your ideas more clearly. So for example, if we go back to the old case study about what sets our company apart, there are these 3 things that set our company apart. So instead of showing it like this as a bland bullet point slide, can we instead do something like that, where our competitive advantages are global reach, superior technology, experienced team, and they all feed into each other. So would you prefer that your slides and your visual media looks more like that or more like that? So that's what we are trying to get you, or that's what I'm trying to help you understand, is simplifying the message and then using visuals to communicate that message and talking over it has just as much power sometimes, given the time again, um, as you producing a super polished video if you have 4 or 5 minutes to talk to an audience. But there are lots of stuff like this. So again, that global reach point that had like a bunch of other bullet points, can you use, again, different kinds of relationships to show how those things stack up? All of these I just pulled directly from the diagrammer link that I showed a little while ago. And again, I'll follow up with Resha to make sure that you have the details of all of these things that we're discussing. So contrast is, again, very key, right? So how can you use contrast to enhance understanding? There are different ways to do it: size, shape, color, proximity. So again, what I said earlier about like when you break things that people expect to see, they tend to notice what is different. And so can you use that to your advantage? So for example, that superior technology item that we were talking about, they're trying to say that their system is 2x faster and doesn't cost anymore. So if you try to do it like that, like the competition is small and then your company is twice as big, and then if you plotted a cost axis, you might be in the same bucket, right? So how can you do all of this visually instead of having to say it using words, is another good example. Another quick plug for design is white space. People feel like they need to use every inch of the slide and the real estate on the slide. As you can see, mine are pretty empty besides the one key slide, that key message that I want you to hear. So it minimizes distraction. Again, this is not everybody's style. I completely understand it. But again, can you minimize the distractions on the slide and then give people a little bit more room to understand what they need to do? The next piece is compel. How do you use data, for example, to compel people and help them understand your message? What about your product is key? There are a few rules on data slides. Pick the right tool. Is it a bar chart or is it a pie chart that you need, or is it a scatter plot that'll tell your story better, or a line graph? Get to the point. Again, use colors, use design to highlight what it is that you want to show. Remove the distractions. Don't just put the chart that Excel spit out. Like, actually make it simple. Remove grid lines that are unnecessary. Highlight what's important so people can very quickly understand. Again, get to the point piece and tell the truth. People have a tendency to fudge data, and I don't think any of us need a lesson on that, but absolutely make sure your data is communicating perception-wise also what you want your story to say. So very simple examples of like good, very clean figures that don't have too much distraction on them. And here's an example. There's the option A on the right side that talks about 76% preferring dogs, and then there's the pet preferences bar graph, right? Depending upon the context, you want to pick one over the other. If you are trying to talk only about dogs and your product is about dogs, then you should talk just with the slide on the left. But if you want to talk about dog choices in terms of pet preferences versus all the other kinds of pet, then you want to show what's on the right side. So again, the right tool for the right job. There are multiple ways to do it. Again, what's the story that you're trying to tell? And I'm going to talk very quickly about like, how do you make sure you're being consistent? One thing that you might not notice is this entire presentation is actually built on a grid. So all of the elements sort of line up exactly where I want them to. That makes it consistent, so your eyes know where to expect words to fall, figures to fall, images to fall. It's really, I would highly recommend that you build out a grid system that works for the deck that you're building. Keep the margins the same, keep footers, headers, all of them looking the same. So that's one way to build consistency. color scheme, you've seen that this entire deck is predominantly black, blue, and yellow. How can you build that color scheme in for yourself, whatever your brand colors are? Same thing with font and then size. Same consistency metrics that you've seen throughout this entire deck. So that brings me to a very rapid close of the design piece. So delivery is the last portion of the four-parter content structure design delivery. And I'm going to start this with what I've been saying a little bit as an undertone throughout this talk, which is authenticity is really important. You want to be yourself always. So what is your voice? What is your style? What is your company's preferred way or your idea's preferred way of being communicated? You have to be yourself. Otherwise, everybody will see through it. So again, big shout out, big fan of being who you are always. Body language matters. Well, maybe not as much in this medium, but still, like, how do I use my hands so that I'm communicating what is important and I'm emphasizing what's important, right? So if you can be a little bit more intentional and practice where those emphasis points need to be, how do you gesture to a large room? All of that really matters. Amplifying those big gestures matters. And again, because we don't have time to go into this, I did want to give another shout out, another reference. If you guys have time, I definitely recommend checking out this TED Talk given by Professor Amy Cuddy on power posing. So big on body language. She studies body language. So that would be a great resource for all of you to check as well. The next one is vocals. So it really, really matters how you project your voice, how you talk, the tone, the timbre, silence, all of it matters. And can you make that intentional part of that presentation that you give in your pitch? Again, because we don't have enough time to go into the details on this, I do want to point you to another TED Talk. This is by Julian Treasure, and he talks about the vocal toolbox and all the things that can be within that toolbox. So I just want you to point again in that direction. He's the master of mastering pitch, tone, treble, silence. There's a ton more he goes into. He actually has 10 tools. I highly, highly recommend that. And so with that, we come to the close of this how to pitch like a pro. I know this might not be quite the traditional pitching formulaic talk you might have been expecting, but my job is not to tell you how to tell your story, but I think, is to help you ask questions about and think about all the tools you should consider while you're telling your story. And with that, I just want to say thank you for your time. And I will stay over for questions if anybody has them.